Hey everybody, I'm going to do quick edits, I think, on a couple of images just to show you kind of my approach and how I might look at something. I want to get into some details on the exposure levels for nighttime photography. I know we didn't have much chance to shoot, any chance to shoot. I did take some images though that I think Tuesday night when I got in, unfortunately it was relatively clear that evening, but not clear for you guys later in the week. So anyway, I'm going to do this quickly, just go through high level, show you some contrast between different exposure levels, and in the editing phase, kind of what can take place there. So let's go over into Lightroom and check it out. Okay, I'm going to run through several images here that I took, like I said, on Tuesday night, and talk over various aspects of them. And hopefully this will give you some food for thought when you go to edit your own images. This image here, if I go look, I'm pretty sure this was taken at about 9:30. So right before the end of astronomical twilight. I think that ended around 9:37 or something like that. I want to point out I'm at ISO 3200 up here. You can see 14 millimeter f2.8 and 15 seconds on the exposure. I had talked before about the rule of 500. Pretty sure I spoke about that at one of our meals, and how if you're using a high resolution camera, you can't use the rule of 500. And as a matter of fact, as we get more and more cameras that are shooting above 30 megapixels, that rule will probably eventually turn into the rule of 400 and maybe the rule of 300. Who knows? But Photo Pills, we talked about that app. Great options in there for finding out what shutter speed you have to use for sharp trails or for sharp stars. So I'm shooting at 15 seconds here, and honestly, according to Photo Pills, if I really truly want to get, for my camera, pinpoint stars, I have to be shooting at around 7 seconds. But I'm at 3200 ISO. We're going to look at an image here in a second that's at 6400 and do a little contrast between as to the noise levels between those. One of the things I want to talk about real quick is some of you know, if you've watched any of my other videos, always check the remove chromatic aberration. It just eliminates some discoloration that you see on the edges, specifically in contrasty areas, and you get the green and magenta colors, and it's not good. So this is a really easy one. Just check that box. But the profile correction, I use that all the time, particularly in landscape photography. And especially if I'm doing any kind of panoramas where I'm going to stitch images together, I use that a great deal. But in my night sky images, I don't as much. And let me show you why. I'm going to zoom in here. We'll go to 1:1, and this is in the upper left-hand corner, as you can see. I do want to point out at 15 seconds exposure, and you'll see in a minute, we'll jump to another one that's 20 seconds, that the stars have a little line in them in the corner. They're not quite pinpoint the way they are in the center, where they're much more sharp and individual points. But up in the corner there, they've got a little bit of distortion to them. But if I check enable profile corrections, look at the amount of noise that comes in. And I guess my philosophy on this is, for one, I don't do a lot of panoramas in night sky. I know there are people that do that, and in that case, I think you're going to want to use this and then deal with the noise using another methodology, which I'll get into in another video. But so for the most part, I do not enable the profile correction. I'd rather have a little less noise in the corners, even though it means that in general the image will be a little darker in the corners. I'm okay with that. That's my personal style, and so I'm okay with that. All right, so let's move on. This one, we're going to look here. I'm at 3200. Now I'm at 25 seconds. So let's go look, and you can see at 25 seconds, the stars are starting to get a little bit of an oval shape, or there's obviously a little bit of a line going on with those there. And if I get up into the corners, it becomes real obvious. And I'm not even at 30 seconds. And the rule of 500 would say that with a 14 millimeter lens is what I'm at right there, that I should be able to shoot it at 30 seconds. And that obviously just isn't the case. If I shoot at 30 seconds, these lines are like twice as long, and it really distorts in the center of the image as well. Okay, so that's 3200, 25 seconds. Let's go over here. I want to show you something that I did that I thought was kind of fun. And so, again, just playing around, I'm at 3200, 14 millimeter, 15 seconds. And I took a light panel and walked down the road with the light panel and painted the road. And you can see these, this is me walking, creating shadows, I guess. Kind of ethereal, a little, I guess you could say, spooky. We'll get into editing this in a minute and talk about some other aspects of that. But thought that was kind of cool. Just kind of playing around. Once again, at 15 seconds, the stars are pretty sharp. Jupiter is just a really bright spot. Antares is a really bright spot, just red. One thing to notice too, actually there's another image I think I'll show you here in a second. Let's see if it's this one. Nope. Actually, I may not have that image included in here. I shot an image where I purposefully put the Milky Way out of focus, and I think I may go try to find that real quick. Just because I thought it looked pretty cool. And what did I do with it? Let me scroll down here. Yeah, right here. So if you look at this, you can see here's my ground, and the coloration's off. I haven't fixed that yet in here, but having a night sky that's not perfectly focused is sometimes an okay thing. And you see these coloration, these dots, and stars have different colors to them, so it's okay that some of them are blue, some are orange, some are white. The Milky Way gets more intense in terms of coloration and stuff. So I'd encourage you, as you're shooting the Milky Way, to take some images that are a little more unique and creative, and shoot a night sky that is out of focus. They're still pretty obvious what's going on here, and then create something really interesting in the foreground. I'm not saying I've done that here, but I think it's something that would be interesting to do, and it gives you something to play with and experiment with, and essentially create a little bit of art. All right, so let me turn my deal back on now that we have that in here. So I wanted to look at this. So here I am at 6400, 14 and 20 seconds, and you can see the amount of noise that's in the center of the image. And if I go into the outer edge, it's a little less noisy, but only because it's dark. If I enable the profile correction, which will lighten the corners, you can see how really bad it gets. There's also a line right here. Not sure. I think the noise is breaking it up in terms of it being, instead of there being a flashing light, I think the noise is just causing it to have that pulse look, and this is probably a satellite. This is a 20-second exposure, so to move that far through the screen, it's moving pretty quick. Notice the coloration in the stars. This is aberration. This is not really probably truly the color of the stars themselves. If you get closer into the center where there's a little less, okay, here's another satellite. You can just tell the difference. Here's a blue, here's a kind of a yellow-orange lights, and all of those are just different colored stars, and they all have different lights. Here's another satellite. That's the other thing, too. When you take night sky images, here's another satellite. There's a lot of stuff that crosses that sensor, and if you expose for a very long period of time or at a very high ISO where you capture a lot of light, you'll be surprised how many things that you see or how many objects that you see. So let's take, here's an image that is, I thought, pretty cool. This is again where I was lighting the roadway, In this case, the sky is in focus and the roadway's in focus, and this is just me carrying that light through. So if I was going to edit this, this is my approach. Your approach could be very different. Like I said, I can click that. Notice too the green that comes in over here on the right hand side. So I really, for those kinds of reasons, don't like the profile correction on night sky images. But let's go in here. I'm going to just approach this as though, hey, I've just got this out of my camera. I'm taking a look at it on the screen, and I'm trying to decide, how do I want to edit this? Do I want to do, what kind of coloring or anything else do I want to do to it? So we'll run through this. I'll try to do it fairly quick and kind of see where we go from here. So the light itself, obviously, that I painted with, you can kind of see the lines are reddish here, and they're kind of maybe a reddish orange tone here. If we look at the white balance, it's set at 4750. That's my typical night sky. Sometimes I will set it at 5500. If we take this up to 5500, or right about it, you can see that we get a little more orange, a little more glow, and that's fine. What I really want to do is try to make sure that the area between the stars, for the most part, is black. Now, eventually, whenever I get done editing this, I may decide I want to add a little blue to it, and I may take it back the other direction and go ahead and get a little bit of a blue tint to it, just because I like a blue sky. People think about the sky being blue, but it'll partially depend upon how well defined the Milky Way is and things of that nature. So I'm going to take this back up, and we'll leave it at where we shot it at. Now, so what can we do with our sliders? Clarity, if we start bringing that over, and I'm not afraid to apply heavy doses of stuff. That's just my creative style. But you can see what clarity does to that Milky Way. It really makes those whites pop. It doesn't really do a whole lot in the dark areas, but because the whites get whiter, it makes the darks look darker. So I'm okay with adding that. The texture is something that it works well in certain cases, but it's not something that I would apply to the sky. I think that it dilutes somehow the power of the Milky Way, so I'll leave that alone. It's something I may apply in the foreground, but it's not something I'm going to apply up there. Dehaze, another thing, it darkens things. Sometimes that gives a pretty cool look, and because it doesn't really dim the Milky Way, the white light parts of the Milky Way too bad, it's a great way to get a little extra contrast in there. So I'm going to bump that up just a hair. And let's see. The whites, I bring those up. That helps brighten and give some definition along there. It's getting a little bright down here. I'll dim that with a brush, but I like the brighter tones that I'm getting up here. And we're going to leave that alone. A little bit of vibrance. Usually that gives me some more warmth. What I want to be careful with, though, is that it will really cause there to be coloration in the edges and the perimeters there. So I tend to be pretty cautious with that. All right, so now let's do this. I want to take, and we're going to put in place a graduated filter. I usually take this and check there so that I can see exactly where this is going to be applied. And so by checking this box, it gives me a nice area to say, okay, I'm applying in these areas here, and this piece here, spreading these out, transitions the effect over a wider, it depends on how wide I get it, a wider area. And I don't really want this to get up into the night sky, but I'm wanting to impact this road and these corners over here. So once I've kind of got the areas done that I want to get done, I can turn that off. And now I can say, okay, I want to bring down the highlights a little bit. It was looking a little too bright. I do want to add texture in so that you've really got some contrast there. I want to bring up the shadows a little bit. And so we'll just get a little more area where we can see what's going on. We can see this bush a little more well-defined. This is a little more clear down the road. I'm still thinking that that road's a little bright, but I like that. That's looking pretty good. So I'm going to leave that alone. And now I think I'm going to take an individual brush and I'm going to bring the shadows up a little more. And we're going to come over here. I'm going to turn off the auto mask. If you don't know what auto mask is, for areas where you've got pretty decent sharp contrasty edges, the auto mask is great for selecting with Lightroom with a brush and only applying it in the areas you want. I'll edit another image later that kind of shows where that's going. I want to turn my flow down. I don't want to hit it with a hammer. I want to gradually add in a little more areas that we can see. And it doesn't have to be all the way over in. I'm just trying to add a little extra. You can see this just pulling out a little bit of extra green right there. And over here, we're seeing a little further over to the edge of the gravel and the road, that kind of area. And if I really want to, after I've put that in, I can kind of bring this up a little more and see if it helps me at all with what I'm looking for. It's not making a huge difference, a little bit, but I've probably got what I want anyway with that. Okay, so I'm going to call the road good for now. And then let's go back up here and I want to look at this. And it looks pretty good, but what I want to do is I'm going to add a little more contrast and a little more color here. So I double click the effect that zeroes out all the sliders. I'm going to turn this back on again and we'll leave this down. And what I'm going to do is go up here in areas where it's kind of dark. I'm going to paint in a little bit more. I want to increase the amount of darkness in those areas. And so what I'm doing right now, though, is just trying to touch on those areas that are already slightly more dark. And I don't like when I get the brush too small because I think it starts getting real well defined, and that's the easiest way to kind of make something look really fake. And I did a really poor job painting there, but I'm kind of in a rush. And like I said, what I'm trying to do here is just get some areas that are, generally speaking, more dark. And I'm gonna, you'll see in a second here, I'm gonna take those and just dial them down a little bit. So with that done, now I can take, and I just take the blacks and bring them down a hair. I mean, you can go too far, you can go real far with it, and you know it'll really impact it. I don't think I need to go that far, just a little bit. All right, and then I want to get a new brush, and I'm going to use these settings the same. I'll reset it, and now what I'm wanting to do is take the light areas, and I'm going to take and I'm going to paint in the light areas a little bit. Whoops. Let me turn this on so I can see what I just did. You can see right here I slipped with my mouse and went into a dark area. So I want to hold down the Alt key, and that allows me to go in and erase where I've painted and get rid of it. All right, so let's hit that pretty hard. I'm going to hit this area up here a little bit. And a little bit right there. A little bit right there. And you'll see in a second, I'm going to take, I don't want to get too heavy with it. And this area's out here. Maybe a little bit right in there. Okay, so we're going to call that good. And now what I want to do in these areas is I want to brighten them a little bit, so I'll bring up the highlights, and that definitely brightens them, but I'm also going to add a little color to them. Maybe a little warmth, a little magenta. Whoops, come on. And just trying to add a little more interest into, from a color standpoint, into it. And you can get really crazy with that and do whatever you want to with it, but I'm gonna go with that right there. And if I go back to where we started on this image, so you can see it's much more well defined and a little more interesting under that right there. So I think I'm gonna call that good. That's a simple edit without spending a whole lot of time on it, but it gives you an idea of some of the tools that I use and how I might go about adjusting them. You know, if I had a foreground interest in here and had done more light painting and stuff, I could spend a long time on this, but I think we're going to go with that right now. The other things that I touched on were, you know, the idea of the profile correction, what that does in the corners to you, the rule of 500, how it probably doesn't apply if your camera's over 20, 24 megapixels. I would tell you that the rule of 500 doesn't apply. As a matter of fact, even at 24 megapixels, I would tell you, if you don't have the Photo Pills app running, just assume probably 20 seconds is about as good as you can go. So so I think that's what we're gonna work with this right here. It's just a quick little edit of how I would approach this. I could spend a little more time on this area here if I really want to make that look interesting. Maybe even on these right here, I could paint those up a little bit, make them a little brighter. But I think we'll call that good. So hope this was helpful. For those of you that were at the Big Ben workshop, thank you so much for coming out. Sorry we didn't have the night skies for you, and maybe you'll capture another one, another workshop where we'll have some beautiful night skies to take images of and apply these editing techniques. So have a great evening.